I was beyond frustrated when she breezed through the door 3 hours late. "Where have you been?" "I had to get Chad ready and take him to school." "Bobby is mad and I need to get to work. Couldn't you have at least given me a heads up?" "Sorry, didn't think about it. I need to go to bed now and you need to go to work. I'll make us a good dinner to make up for it." She didn't give me a chance to respond before she headed towards the bedroom. I debated following her, but I knew it would lead to a big fight, and I really did need to get to work. I was halfway to the job site when it hit me. The little smirk she had when she said she worked overtime. Something was wrong, and it had been going wrong for a while. I put it out of my mind. You need to concentrate to use tools and do construction work. It was 1983, and we were in the midst of a mild recession. I was laid off and my unemployment check was not very big. Then Gail got laid off and that really hurt us. Things were tough, really tough. We were looking for jobs, but everyone else was in the same situation and jobs just weren't available, especially for her. She had dropped out of school in the 10th grade and there weren't many options for her. Her last job had been minimum wage, but it was all she could get and we needed the money to survive. Then I got lucky. A friend I hadn't seen in years gave me a call. Bobby and I had worked construction together in the late 70s. He always said we made a good team and was sorry to see me go, but I had a good opportunity and couldn't pass it up. He stayed in construction and eventually started his own small business, mostly doing renovations and property maintenance, though he did build a house on occasion. While everyone else was struggling, he was doing all right, thanks to his maintenance contracts. His biggest client owned most of the rental properties in one county and a good amount in another, and she kept him busy. "Mac, dude, Jack said you were laid off. I just lost a couple of guys and I thought of you. Want to help me out part-time?" "Definitely." He gave me directions to his next project and told me to be there at 7. After we hugged and caught up, he asked me if I remembered how to hang siding. Oh, I could probably fake it. He grinned, gave me 2 helpers, and let me work. The other guys weren't really motivated, which I found odd considering the tough times we were in, but I stayed on their case and we were done in 2 days. He had me replace windows in a couple of rental units. By the end of the week, I had 35 hours of work. He handed out the checks and I was surprised when I looked. It was half of what I was owed. He just grinned and told me to meet him at the bar, a little place where many construction workers hang out. I walked in, he bought me a drink and handed me a pool cue. "We're going to play a game of pool. I will lose. When I do, I'll pay you the wager we made." Oddly enough, it's exactly what it would be if I paid you for all the hours you worked. He grinned at my reaction. "Look, you told me you could make $60 and still draw a full unemployment check, right?" I nodded, and he continued. "Well, the amount I paid you is just slightly less than what you could have made. That way you still draw a full check and get a little cash they don't know about. We won't always use that amount. Every once in a while it'll be more, and most will be less. I figure I'll pay you a full check about every 6 weeks. You'll lose your check that week, but it will keep everything running smoothly. Of course, you can choose to report it all and be completely honest. It's up to you." I thought about that while I drank my beer. I'd been to the unemployment office twice. Both times I had felt like just another number, and the employees were not very nice, not just to me, but everyone. Forget them. You need to practice. Your pool game is terrible. He just grinned. I was going to share the good news with Gail, but she seemed angry and annoyed when I got home. "Where have you been? Do I smell alcohol? We can't afford for you to be drinking." It took several deep breaths before I could answer. I went by the bar where Bobby hangs out to pick up my money. I had 1 drink and he paid for it. We have a little extra money now for our bills. I earned some extra cash. I was going to say money, but she started talking over me, telling me that working a few extra hours here and there wouldn't really fix anything, and that I needed to find a proper job. "What did you have for lunch today?" "I hope it was something substantial because I need you to find me a good job, because I can't seem to find one any other way. How about you? Have you found anything yet? You know, nobody wants to hire someone who didn't finish high school." "Well then, you should take advantage of the program they offered you and get your GED. That will help, if not now, then in the long run. You keep complaining about being stuck at home. You could go in the evenings and I could watch Chad. Think about it." She had been resistant to that idea before, so she turned around and stomped off. I went out back and started playing with our son. He was in 1st grade, and everything was amazing to him. He told me about what he learned that day, and I couldn't help but smile. He was a great kid, and even if it meant sacrificing for myself, I made sure he had nice clothes and shoes to wear to school, and money available for special things like the field trip to the bird sanctuary. By the time we were done playing, Gail had dinner prepared. We ate mac and cheese and hot dogs a lot, but we never went hungry. I never got around to telling Gail about the extra money I was earning. I just used it to catch up on our electricity bill. A few weeks later, I came home and she gave me a big hug. It surprised me because she hadn't been very affectionate lately. Guess what? I got a job. She had prepared a special dinner and was dressed in a pair of shorts and a loose halter top, one of her playful outfits. I smiled, thinking that things were going to get better. That's great, honey. What kind of job is it? Let's eat first, put Chad to bed, and then I'll tell you all about it. I felt a bit uneasy. Why was there so much secrecy around this job? We had pork chops, something we rarely had this year. It was delicious, and the cake for dessert was even better. After Chad had his bath and story, she brought out a couple of my favorite beers. I stopped buying them months ago because they were a little expensive. I started feeling really uncomfortable. She poured the beers and sat down across from my recliner. Honey? Do you remember Honey? Yeah, I remembered Honey. She was one of Gail's friends when we were dating, and honestly, she was a bit promiscuous. She even tried to come on to me twice, and Gail thought it was funny. She made another attempt when Gail wasn't around. If you come on to me one more time, I'll make your life miserable. You won't look so great with a broken nose, and that could definitely happen. I would act all sorry and say it was an accident, but every time you think about trying to seduce someone in a relationship, you'll remember your crooked nose and think twice. Are we clear? She was sobbing hard and nodding vigorously. That was the last time I saw her or heard anything about her until now. My feeling of unease was growing rapidly. I just nodded. Well, I saw her at the store the other day, and when we caught up, she found out I wasn't working. She offered me a job. What kind of job? Does it involve anything inappropriate? Gail turned red. No, you jerk, it doesn't. For your information, she's married now and works for her cousin. He owns a motel in Charlotte and she manages the night shift from 9 until 6. He always has 2 clerks working together during the night, and her colleague just quit. Why did she quit? How would I know? The fact is she quit, and it pays pretty well. $10 an hour. Well, that seemed like real money to someone used to making $6. $65 an hour. I tried to be diplomatic. That's a pretty good wage, Gail, but to be honest, it doesn't make me comfortable. Is the motel in a safe area? Is it a nice place to spend the night, or is it not very good? You'll be working in the middle of the night, when there might be some unsafe people around. I'd hate for you to get hurt or something bad to happen for that amount of money. And to be honest, I'm not too comfortable with you working with Honey. She's changed. A lot. She's married now and has a 2-year-old daughter. Honey is not the same person we both remembered. Plus, the police often patrol the area and it's usually safe. I promise you, if I ever get a bad feeling about it, I'll quit. We continued talking about it, discussing how it would impact Chad. I finish work at 6. I can be home by 6:45, have your breakfast ready, take him to school, come back home and sleep. That way, I can spend the evening with my 2 favorite guys before they go to bed, and I have to go to work. We talked ourselves out and agreed to discuss it further later. Gail convinced me to invite Honey and her family over for dinner. I have to admit she looked nothing like I remembered. Her hair was tied up, she was wearing modest clothes, and she was friendly. Her husband seemed nice. I wondered if he was aware of her past. Her little girl was adorable and Chad immediately liked her. He ended up playing with her in the backyard while I grilled the food. Gail and Honey laughed. If they're that close when they grow up, we might be in-laws. It was a pleasant evening. The little girl took a nap after eating, and Chad fell asleep on the floor. Honey's husband Jeff went to the bathroom and Gail went to the kitchen for more drinks. I took the chance to talk to Honey. Honey, do you remember the conversation we had before Gail and I got married? She looked surprised and nervously rubbed her neck. That was a long time ago. I've changed. I have to say, I much prefer the new Honey to the old one, but I want you to remember, if anything bad happens to Gail, and if I think you were involved somehow, I'll keep my promise. Don't forget that. Jeff came back and Gail brought out the drinks. They stayed for another hour before leaving. As their taillights disappeared, Gail started asking questions. Did you see how much she's changed? It's hard to believe. I never thought she would be married with a child. She playfully hit my ribs. That was a mean thing to say. Maybe, but it would have probably been true. Come on, let's clean up and go to bed. The next morning, as I was mowing the lawn, I thought about everything. Honey, despite her past mistakes, was an attractive woman. She was a 5'3", blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl with a great figure. Seeing her with Gail used to make me smile. Gail was 5'9", quite tall for a woman, with jet black hair. She had a slender figure, except for her chest. She was well endowed, and men would often flock to her. She told me she wasn't a virgin before we got married, but it didn't matter to me once we exchanged vows. In the end, I didn't argue when she got the job. I did make her promise a lot of things, and I still worried about her. I was awake when she came home after her first day. How was it? It was really boring. Not much happens late at night at the motel. Most people are asleep, except for a few partygoers who stumble in after the bars close, but they don't usually cause much trouble. It's easy money, honey. She came home with her first paycheck, ecstatic. We decided to use her income from the first few months to catch up on our bills, and then save most of it for when we started looking for a new place. I was getting more and more work with Bobby, and I found that I enjoyed it more than I remembered. Bobby was even asking me to work full-time if I didn't find another source of income before my unemployment benefits ran out. We were still bending the rules a bit, with a portion of my pay being officially reported, and the rest being paid under the table. I had started saving half of the under-the-table money in a savings account, planning to use it to take Gail and Chad on a vacation. It would be our first vacation in 4 years, and Chad had never seen the ocean. So I wanted to take him to the beach. Things went well for about 4 months. Gail came home one day, excitedly telling me that the third shift maid had quit and she and Honey were going to earn extra money by cleaning the vacant rooms. One of them would work at the front desk while the other cleaned, alternating every day. Does that mean you'll be at the desk alone? Honey, nobody, and I mean nobody, comes to the front desk after midnight. We also got these walkie-talkies that we carry, so if someone comes to the desk that we don't like, we can call each other. We'll be fine. The extra money came in handy. Then one day, Gail came home looking beaten down. I asked her what was wrong. She seemed more glum for a few days, but then she started to perk up. As the weeks went by, she seemed to change. At first, it was small things. She stopped talking much about her job, except to say it was nothing new. She also started dressing nicer. I complimented her, and she seemed happy about it. I felt a bit guilty using the money, but I needed new clothes. I used some of the extra money I'm earning to update my wardrobe. There it was again, that smirk I had been noticing lately, as though she knew something I didn't. It was starting to bother me. I needed a moment to think. Isn't that risky at the motel? What if the police find out or if their partners get angry? However, her behavior started to change. She became disrespectful towards our family. I asked her what was wrong. I'm just tired of struggling. It feels like every time we get ahead, something comes up and takes it all away. Wouldn't it be nice to just do what we want, when we want, like before we had bills and a child? Do you want to ditch everything, drop off Chad somewhere, and run away? I didn't think so. Things are getting better, honey. Our bills are under control, and we're even saving a bit. I'm thinking about going full-time with Bobby. He'll give me a raise and more hours if I do. She scoffed at the idea, hurting me in the process. Do you really think that will make a difference? You need a job that offers health insurance. We're all healthy now, but one accident could bankrupt us for years. I sighed. It is what it is, Gail. Unless we find better paying careers, we have to work with what we have. And there it was, that smirk again. Everything fell apart one day when I needed a pen. Chad had a habit of taking all the pens into his room, as he loved drawing and his artwork covered every inch of our refrigerator. He was asleep, and I didn't want to wake him, so I decided to grab a pen from Gail's purse. I hated going in there because she had so much junk in it that it annoyed me. I picked it up and felt how heavy it was. Well, the pens were usually right on top. I opened it and sat there for a minute. It was full of money. A lot of money. I pulled it out and counted it. There was $2,300, a significant amount. I heard Gail waking up, so I quickly put the money back and placed her purse on the floor next to the couch. I sat and thought as she chatted away. There was no way that money was obtained legally. My first thought was that she must be involved in something illegal. I decided to keep quiet. I would follow her to work on Friday night. "Honey, Chad will be with your parents on Friday. Bobby and I are going fishing. He found a great spot by the lake, and he swears he's caught catfish weighing over 10 pounds there." She smiled. "Go ahead. Have a great time, and I'm looking forward to some delicious catfish for dinner on Sunday. Catch a big one for me." She tried to persuade me to join them, but I declined. I hurt myself today at work. I think I need an ice pack or a heating pad for my back. Gail instantly became concerned, getting me pain pills, an ice pack, and plugging in the heating pad near my recliner. She hugged me before leaving. "Rest, honey. Don't go to work tomorrow. We can afford for you to take a day off. I'll check on you when I get back." She called me later, something she rarely did, to see how I was doing. I told her I felt much better and explained that I wasn't planning on doing anything except painting, so I should be fine at work. She fussed a bit, suggesting that I take the day off, told me she loved me, and hung up. I was incredibly unproductive at work the next day. Bobby finally told us to take a break for lunch. "Come on, Mac. It's on me." We sat down at the little diner he liked, and after we ordered, he told me to spill whatever was bothering me, or he was going to send me home. I really needed to talk to somebody, so I told him about the money and her general attitude. "What are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to the motel tomorrow night and see what's happening, and if you see something you don't like, then I figure I'll confront them." Bobby sighed. "Remember Jefferson George?" Of course I did. He was the rich kid in school. His father had more money than half the town combined. I caught him with a 14-year-old he'd given some alcohol to, and he was trying to get her in his car. She was pretty drunk, but she was fighting him as best she could. He finally got tired of it and slapped her hard. "Get in the car and stop making a scene." He didn't know anyone else was around, so I tapped him on the shoulder. He looked around, told me to go away, and started to get in his car. The girl was my cousin. I beat him up, broke teeth, gave him 2 black eyes, and sprained his left arm. I was planning to kick him in the groin, but they pulled me off him. His dad pretty much controlled the police department, and someone had called 911. I've often thought I was luckier than I was smart, and this was never truer, because a state trooper had a car pulled over within sight, and had just finished writing a ticket when the call came in. He took one look at the girl and Jefferson and called for an ambulance. Then he got statements from all the witnesses, and they were afraid to lie to him because he wasn't from the same town. The local police officers showed up and wanted to take over, but the trooper stopped them. "Sorry, officers. I've already started the paperwork, so it's my case. I'll bring him to the station for questioning when I finish up so you can do your own investigation." They didn't like it much, but they had no choice. He asked around, found out who my friends were, and told Bobby to find a phone and call my parents. Tell them to come to the station as soon as possible. They might want to call a lawyer. He took his time, but finally had to put me in his car. There was no love lost between the state and the local officers. I found out later they were investigating the police department for corruption and abuse of power. He talked to me as he drove. "Listen, kid, there are things going on here you don't know about. I'm going to bring you to the station. Do not say anything to anybody. We clear here? Good. Your parents will hopefully be there before we are, but just in case, refuse to be interviewed until they get there." We arrived at the station before my parents did, so the trooper took his own sweet time handing me over to the local officers. He pulled out a camera and took some pictures. The officer waiting to book me asked him why. "Because there are no bruises or injuries on the boy. If any appear later on, I'll be obligated to investigate." "Do you understand what I'm saying?" The officer didn't like it, but there was nothing he could say. My parents and Uncle Pete entered the station. The trooper asked for identification and handed me over to them. I'm not pressing charges pending the investigation. My advice is to keep the kid close to home for a few days. We were about to leave when 2 officers stopped us. "Not so fast. We're taking him into custody. You can post bail for him on Monday." "What is he charged with?" "The state has started an investigation and released him to his parents. I believe the state has more authority than the city, if I remember correctly. Since I'm a lawyer, I'm pretty confident that that's the case. They changed their approach. He's not under arrest. We just want to question him." "For 2 days? Not going to happen. I'll bring him in for an interview on Monday morning. I will be present when you question him. All questions will go through me. Clear?" I have orders too. Then get me the person who gave the orders. If you can't do that within a reasonable time, we're going home. There was a lot of whispering and phone calls, but an hour later we were home. Dad wrote a check and handed it to his brother-in-law. Here, a retainer. He laughed and tore it up. Give me one for $5. I'm tired of losing cases because of corrupt officers. Maybe this case will change things. When everything was settled, no one was charged. Mr. Moneybags gave up when he read the report of the alcohol level in his son, the girl, and what the witnesses said. Jefferson wasn't very popular, and many witnesses stated that he threw the first punch. He got his revenge. They had to expel both of us, and he sent his son to a boarding school to finish his senior year. I didn't get to graduate and had to attend summer school to earn my diploma. Bobby brought me back to the present, and I nodded. Then you remember what it cost you to stand up to him. I know you. There isn't much planning where you're concerned. You charge in, consequences be damned. You need to stop and think when you find out what's going on. Don't do anything foolish. Remember Chad? You have to make sure nothing bad happens to him. He was right. Damn it, you're right, but I have to do something. We are going to go to this motel tomorrow and investigate. If we see anything suspicious, we will think it through before we take any action. Promise me you understand. It seemed like the best plan, so I agreed. Friday night at 11 found us parked in an empty lot across from the motel. It was the first time I'd seen it. It wasn't the best place, but it wasn't terrible either. I was surprised at how crowded the lot was. We had binoculars, and I could see Honey behind the counter, but there was no sign of Gail. At 11:30, a woman who looked a lot like Gail walked out of the motel and across the parking lot to a strip club. I was halfway out of the car when Bobby pulled me back in. You stay here. She hasn't seen me more than a few times, so I'm going to put this hat on and see what's going on. Do not leave the car. 90 minutes later, he was back, looking a little pale and uncomfortable. The bouncer told me that's all they could do inside. I asked for Desire and he laughed. She works Tuesdays and Thursdays next week, and Monday, Wednesday, and Friday the week after. She and another girl named Honey alternate their shifts. I think she works at the motel on the nights she doesn't work here. Should I set up an appointment for you? I gave him some money. I would like a Wednesday, but I'm not sure if I can make it. If I'm not there before midnight, I won't be coming. While we were talking, Gail came out of the club with a man and went straight to the motel, waving at Honey when she passed. I felt numb when Bobby started the car. We've seen enough. You need to calm down and think about what you want to do. Let's go fishing. What? We're supposed to be fishing, remember. Besides, what better place to make plans than at a deserted lake in the middle of the night? So we fished. Caught a few fish. Mostly, though, we talked. What are you going to do? Divorce her. I don't see any other way out. I need to protect Chad. I do not want him exposed to what she's doing. All right, we need to gather evidence and catch her in the act, so to speak. Any ideas? I have to tell you, I think the local police are involved. We saw them drive through the parking lot 3 times, remember? They have to know what's happening. That's when I thought about the trooper. He was instrumental in exposing the local officers, and it got him a promotion to the SBI. He mostly worked on investigating corrupt cases now. I would see him in the news every now and then. I think I know someone who might be able to help. I managed to get through the weekend. Even had relations with her once, acting like I was in pain the whole time. She settled for cuddling and paid more attention to Chad than usual. He loved it. He had been missing his mother a lot lately. I called first thing Monday, explaining who I was and telling them I had information I thought he needed to know. After waiting on hold for about 20 minutes, they connected me. He remembered me, and we chatted about the past for a few minutes before he asked how he could help me. I told him the whole story, including the fact that one of the strippers was my wife, and that we suspected the local police were involved. He listened, and I could tell he was taking notes. Can you meet me and my partner there tonight? I had to drop Chad off with my parents, telling them it was an emergency. We met at a diner and talked. He introduced his partner, an attractive redhead, and suggested we ride together in their undercover vehicle. I assumed it would be an obvious cop car, but it turned out to be a nice 3-year-old sports car. They laughed when they saw my reaction. We confiscated it in a drug bust a couple of years ago. That's how we get most of our undercover cars. We switch vehicles every month. We're getting a Firebird next. LT. Brown. The person I knew laughed. Yeah, and when we do, I'm driving. Detective Walters has a lead foot. They joked around while we positioned ourselves. I pointed out Gail and Honey. They watched Honey enter the club. First, Brown got out. I'm going in to gather information. Then Tabby will go next. We chatted as we waited. Won't it be awkward going into a place like that? She laughed. I worked as a dancer for 3 years while I worked my way through college. That's all I did, though. I never even gave lap dances. I saw too many relationships dissolve while I worked to ever be tempted. I'll go in, try to get an interview with the manager, tell him I'll be moving to the area in a few weeks, and I'm trying to line up a job. I have some pictures of myself left over from my dancing days to satisfy any questions he might have. She had just finished telling me about her lawyer husband and her 2 daughters. She smiled when she saw my face. My husband knows. We met at the club. He worked his way through law school as a bartender and bouncer. He knows I never went with any guys, and I know he never touched any of the working girls, even though they saw him as a challenge and tried pretty hard. I finally had to claim him to get them to back off. We decided to go on a few dates to prove it and never looked back. 7 years now, and we're still as happy as the day we married. She looked at me sadly. Don't judge your wife just yet. She may have been forced into this. I've seen it happen. If that's the case, I urge you to get counseling and try to save your marriage. If she's doing it of her own free will, well, how it ends is up to you. Brown came back, and he wasn't smiling. I got the same information your friend got. There's about half a dozen girls in on it. This is shaping up to be a pretty big illegal activity ring. There's a picture of your wife up along with all the other dancers on the wall. If there's a red X with a circle around it at the bottom, it means she's available for extra services. Tabby, you're up. She was gone for about 30 minutes. She did not look happy when she got back in the car. I got to see the manager, showed him my old photos, and told him I was relocating and would be available in 5 weeks. I just grinned and told him we'd take that up as soon as I got a job. I need a shower pretty bad right now. They took me back to the diner. This is where your involvement ends. I'm really sorry, man. It's pretty clear you loved her. So what's going to happen now? We'll get a small team on this. It'll take about a month or so before we move. Watch for it in the paper. I need to tell you, all the women involved will be charged with multiple counts of illegal activities, and it will be made public. The only silver lining is you have a good reputation and a steady job. And judges don't like to award custody of children to people involved in illegal activities if there's another option. You are going to go for divorce, right? I have to. I couldn't forgive her, and I can't expose a 6-year-old to that lifestyle. Tabby reached out and touched my hand. We usually try not to get involved with divorce cases to keep our face out of the news, but if you need us, we're sure your lawyer can arrange a private meeting. It hit me. Shoot. There's no way I can act normal for that amount of time. I'm just not that good at it. What can I do? Brown grinned at me. This is going to be a pretty big case. We won't want it coming apart too early. You said you worked construction? Let me see what we can do. Try to hang on for a few days and we'll get back to you. True to his word, 2 days later we were offered a short-term contract to help build a new jail halfway across the state. Aside from what was going on, they were offering really good money, and it would have been hard to pass up even under normal circumstances. Bobby knew what was going on. He knew why we got the contract, but he didn't care. I told Gail that night. Good news. You know how we're trying to figure out how to make more money? Bobby got an offer of work from an old friend. His project is running behind and he's facing penalties if he doesn't finish in time. We'll be making half again what we're making now. It'll be 7 days a week for about a month, but with the extra pay, it would be about what I'd make in 4. I have to do this, honey. It may lead to more opportunities down the road. Surprisingly, she was not happy and tried to talk me out of it. I brought up every argument she'd ever given me about improving our financial situation, and it seemed to stall her justifications for me staying home. It's only for a month, honey. I'd hate to go that long without seeing you, but think of the reunion when I get home. A whole month without seeing each other. We'll be so happy to finally be together again. Gail went quiet, knowing that we wouldn't be apart in that way. I made arrangements with her parents in mind to help her out, gave her and Chad a big hug, and left. I wasn't lying about the overtime. They were so far behind they were happy to let us work 7 days a week. It was a new minimum security prison and the cells were built to look more like dormitories. The only difference was there was no kitchen and the cells were 8 by 8. Each had a sink and toilet. It was a plumbing nightmare. Our responsibility was siding and roofing. They were the biggest buildings I'd ever sided, and we managed to get 2 sided and roofed in a week. There were only 6 left to do when we got there, so by the last week we were looking for something to do. Bobby ran a sheetrock crew while I helped the plumbers. It was irritating crawling around under those buildings, but the plumbing contractor paid me extra for running a crew. 4.5 weeks later, all that needed to be done was to run the fence around the property. It didn't look like a prison without the fence, and the general contractor told me that it was deliberate to make the inmates less likely to try to escape. I asked him if it worked. Reports indicate that escape attempts in places built like this are down 44%. There are still enough people who try that they have to put up the fence and have guards, but the state is happy with the results. I called home from a payphone twice a week, and we usually talked for about 30 minutes. Chad would update me on everything that happened to him since we'd talked last and ask when I was coming home. Gail talked about general things and asked when I was coming home. I told her the next week was my last and I'd be home the following Tuesday. Every once in a while, I'd ask a question about her job and she'd brush it off. The last time we talked, she surprised me. "I'm thinking about quitting, honey. I can feel us drifting apart. I don't want that, honey. I still love you." Well, that was new. I called Brown. "I'm glad you called. I was just about to call you. Watch the news Friday night. It'll happen then." I stayed silent for a minute and he picked up on it. "Having second thoughts?" "Yeah, I loved her for a long time, you know. This is going to be hard on our child." "It is. But if you want to guarantee custody, this is the only way to do it. We don't charge her, she doesn't have a record. If she finds a sympathetic judge, you're a part-time father. You really don't want her to have custody. I'll brief you on it later, but things have changed." Friday night, I called, just to hear her voice one last time. "I've been thinking, maybe you ought to stay home tonight. I'll come home, we can grab Chad, and be at the beach in 3 hours. Think how happy he'd be. Think how happy we'd be." There was a moment of silence before she spoke. "It's too late to get someone to cover, and I don't want Chad to be there by himself. I'll come home Saturday and take a nap while you get everything ready. We can leave by 1, be checked in and on the beach by 5. Let's try to spend a week, honey. It'll do us good." I sighed. I had tried. "All right, see you tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it. We have a lot of catching up to do. Gotta go. I love you. I love you too." I wondered if she caught what I said. Bobby and I watched the evening news at 11 that night. We were in another market, but it came up in the statewide section. The Prostitution Task Force carried out a major raid tonight at the Dreamland Motel in Charlotte, NC, breaking up a major illegal activity ring. 14 people were arrested, including the owner of the motel and the 2 night managers. The owner for providing a place for illegal activities to take place. The managers, it seemed, were part of the illegal activity ring. The manager of the Fantastic Ladies Entertainment Lounge, located beside the motel, was also arrested in the sting, though his charges have not been made public. There is also an unsubstantiated rumor he was involved in human trafficking. While the reporter was talking, you could see people being led out of the motel towards a police van. Honey was the first, wearing what looked like just a t-shirt. Gail was right behind her, dressed in an extremely short skirt and a top that left most of her chest exposed. I think Brown might have had something to do with it because the camera zoomed in on Gail, showing a close-up of her face. She was crying. Bobby looked at me. "Sorry, dude. I know how much you loved her. You know you had to do it this way for Chad. You know when everybody tells you that you did the right thing and you know you did the right thing, why does it feel terrible to do it? Because usually the right thing always ends up being the hardest thing to do. You had no idea when you married Gail or when she went to work at the motel this was going to happen. Bad stuff happens to good people. It's how they deal with it that shows their character. Now, I'm going to leave you alone. Cry, scream, break stuff if you want to. Just try to get enough out that you can function when it's time to go home to your child. I know I don't have to say it, but I'm there for you, brother." After he left, I tried to cry. I thought about going to the package store and getting a bottle. I thought about punching the walls out of the motel room. In the end, I didn't do any of those things. I just sat there numb for the rest of the night. Bobby found me and didn't say a word, starting the shower and practically shoving me inside. The hot water hit me and I cried, bitter tears of betrayal and loss. I was a lot better when I got out. Let's go. You're driving. I slept most of the way home. Their bail was set at $2,000 each. She had the money in her secret account but couldn't access it, and there was no way in heck I was going to pay it. The longer she stayed in jail, the more certain of me getting custody of Chad. The kid didn't understand. I tried to explain it as best I could. Son, your mother got involved with some bad people and did some bad things. She won't be living with us right now, so we're on our own. She still loves you, but she just can't be with us right now. So she's coming home later? I don't know, son. We'll have to see. I was doing my best, trying to ease him into the realization Mommy wouldn't be living with us anymore. I was just glad it was the beginning of summer. I know how mean kids can be, and I was hoping by the time school started again, the whole thing would be out of everyone's mind. Both sets of grandparents pitched in to watch Chad while I worked. We usually ended up eating dinner with whichever set had him. It was really awkward at first with her parents. They apologized for Gail, but I shut them down. She made her choices, and it forced me to make mine. I need you to understand your daughter, and I have no future together. None. That being said, it was her choices and not yours. Chad loves you, and I would never stand between you and your grandchild. If it makes any difference, I've always thought a lot of you. If you feel uncomfortable around me, or if it gets to be too much to keep Chad, let me know. Her dad just looked sad, but her mom wrapped me in a hug and cried her eyes out. When she broke, she told me she'd expect Chad in the morning and me in the afternoon. Meatloaf tomorrow. I hugged her again and shook his hand, wondering as I walked away how they were handling the stigma of what Gail had done. It was a small town after all. I just hoped there wasn't a lot of small-minded people in it. It took her 10 days to get out of jail. By then I had all her things boxed and sitting in her parents' garage. I sent her a letter with the divorce papers, telling her to keep her distance from me and that sometime in the future, after the divorce, I'd like to ask her why. She went straight to her parents' house when she was finally free. I don't know what kind of reception she expected, but they made it clear she had 2 weeks and then she needed to be out. The rumor mill told me she and Honey rented an apartment in Charlotte. I thought that was a good thing, that they deserved each other. LT. Brown called me a week later. I thought you'd like to have an update and find out when all this goes to trial. After they bonded out, we made it clear to them if they left the state, we'd be after them. Both she and her partner share an apartment. They don't work at the motel or the club because they've been seized by the city, but they found work at other clubs. I don't know if it's just stripping or whether there are extra services, but I don't think so. They get caught for prostitution again before they go to trial, and it could go very badly for them. I doubt seriously they get any jail time. If they do, it will probably be 3 to 6 months. The owner of the motel and the manager of the club face more serious charges. I doubt either one ever gets their property back. The DA is up for election this year, so he'll be as hard on them as he can. I figure a couple of years for both. We're trying to keep that hushed up because if word got out, they wouldn't last a week in jail. Her arrest and probable conviction will be a matter of public record, and that should help you keep custody of your child. I'm really sorry for the way your life turned out, but I'm sure the girls we rescue from the traffickers will be grateful. We've tracked them through 4 states and all the way into Mexico. Watch the news. What you see is a direct result of you coming to us. We can't thank you enough. There were several stories over the next few months about traffickers, but I was too concerned about my situation to pay much attention. She got a lawyer and tried to block the divorce, and no one, including her lawyer, could understand why. I'd used Uncle Pete, and he said it was an open and shut case. Her lawyer was pretty good, and we did have some serious discussions. Oddly enough, one was about money. She wanted half and full supervised visitation if she didn't get custody. We met in her lawyer's office. It was the first time I'd seen her in 4 months. She looked like a totally different person. Her hair, her eyes, her clothes were all a far cry from what she wore when we were married. I guess she was a pretty good businesswoman, always promoting the product. Pete started it off. I think we're being more than fair here. He wants 70% of the assets, as little as they are, and he waives rights to child support. How could that not be fair? Her lawyer was a slick guy, and I knew she had to be paying him a fortune. That's just not acceptable. She wants 50% and full custody, with a fair amount of child support, Pete countered. 50-50. He receives custodial rights to the child with supervised visitation at first. If Mrs. Stoneman proves herself trustworthy, The supervision may be dropped. Plus, she will be required to pay child support. The lawyer started to speak when Pete laid out a bank statement. 50/50 includes this money, an account that was not revealed in discovery. There was $14,000 in it on the day our clients parted ways, and no judge in the world would object. Whoever we get is going to take a dim view of it being accidentally left out of the financial documents. Gail's face went pale. She hadn't known her secret account had been discovered. I'd gone into her purse again just before the arrests and found the bank book. I took it out and photographed it, making sure I got the account and routing numbers. I don't think her lawyer knew about it either. Judging by the look on his face, the lawyer asked for another meeting at a later date. For the first time, I spoke. No, take it or leave it, Gail. If you fight, there will be a lot of secrets you don't think I know that will come out. By the time I'm done, any judge in their right mind would give me a restraining order keeping you away from your son. If you love him, sign the papers. If money is worth more to you, I'll send you pictures of his high school graduation. It'll be the next time you see him. I walked out, surprising Uncle Jake. He talked for a few minutes before he came out. You need to tell me when you're going to do things like that. She going to sign? Her lawyer is working on her. He knows she has little option but to sign. Now tell me about her secrets. Laughing, I told him I made it up on the spot. He grinned. Well, she must have some secrets she doesn't want anyone to know, judging by her reaction. I think she'll sign. Everyone, especially old friends of hers, thought I was being tough. Let them fight for the well-being of their child and see how forgiving they'd be. I did offer an olive branch to Gail, letting her visit Chad for 3 hours under the supervision of her parents. The divorce came through before the criminal trial, but I made sure I was in the courtroom when it started. Seems he used the motel for a lot of not-so-legal things. The swingers got caught up in the scandal, and it turned out most were married, but not to each other. 3 divorces came from the exposure. Honey's husband divorced her as well, using Uncle Jake to get custody of their little girl. The judge expressed sympathy about them being enticed into the lifestyle, but noted both came back clean on a drug test. Seems that after they got started. In the end, he sentenced them to 3 months in the county jail. I ended up getting $2,000 in cash and $50 a week in child support. Gail got to see Chad twice a week under the supervision of child services, but after 2 months she was allowed unsupervised visits if she visited at her parents' house. Chad gradually grew distant from her, and one day she sent a note via her parents. She'd taken a job with a national chain and would be traveling up and down the East Coast performing for 6 weeks at a club before moving on to the next. She said it was so the customers could see new faces. Gail gave up her visitation rights but pleaded with me to let her see him when she was near. The next year she traveled out west and ended up settling in Las Vegas. Well, at least what she had been doing was legal there. Chad still received an expensive present on his birthday and Christmas, along with letters when he got old enough. He adjusted to a single-parent household pretty well, especially since he had 2 sets of grandparents who were constantly around. I remarried when he was 12, to a woman about 5 years younger than I was. She came with a little girl of 7, so we sold both our houses and bought a bigger one to accommodate all of us. Chad was a little reserved at first, but Melody followed him around like he was a superhero, and he warmed up to her. He surprised Katie, my new wife, by calling her mom about a year later, and she tried to hide the tears, but we all saw them. I took some of the money I'd made and gotten off the alienation of affection suits I'd filed against Bill and the club manager and bought a half share in Bobby's business. BM Construction grew into a mid-sized business, and we had a good reputation. We did a lot of work for the state through the contractor we'd worked with in the month I was hiding from Gail. When Chad was 24, he came to me with something serious to talk about. I've met someone, Dad. I think she could be the one, and I want to bring her by to meet you and Mom. She wants to bring her parents along if you don't mind. I think he's afraid to face you alone. I thought it odd, but we agreed to have them over for a barbecue. Melody was 17 by then, and a handful. Our house always had several friends hanging around. She was off to college in a year. The nest was definitely going to be empty without her. We made it clear she was to invite her friends another time and be on her best behavior. Chad showed up about an hour before we scheduled, with his girl in tow. I could see the attraction. She was a cute little thing, just barely over 5 feet tall, with a dimpled face and long blonde hair. Built pretty good too. Katie caught me looking and grinned. I think she approved of her the moment she volunteered to help with the side dishes. I laughed and handed Chad a soda. She'll know more about her before dinner than you'll learn in your entire life. Pam is a good girl, Dad. She lost her first mother even younger than I lost mine, and her stepmother is all she's ever known. The woman is like a mama bear where she's concerned, though. I was afraid to hold her hand in front of her for a few months. Just then her parents came in. Her dad shook my hand and grinned. "You don't remember me, do you?" I had to admit I didn't. He laughed. "That's okay. I've been your guest before, about 18 years ago. Chad was 6 and Melody was 2. Even then, I think he was attracted to her. I'm Jeff, Honey's ex." I shook his hand. "Then that means—" "Yep, Melody is Honey's daughter. Let me assure you in absolute terms that she's nothing like her mother. Nothing at all. She's a good girl and I won't threaten you if something goes wrong." "I'll let Amber do it." Amber was tall and strong, easily 6 feet and muscular. She smiled to take the malice out of her words, but still made me know she was serious. "I own a dojo and have a high rank in 3 different styles. Amber has 2. She can take care of herself, but just in case if she gets hurt, you'd best just leave." Melody and Katie had come outside and were laughing. "Mom, you've known him 3 minutes and you make a threat. You must be getting soft. I remember a time when you would have led with that. Now, come inside and meet the mother of my groom." She stopped suddenly, going red and putting her hand over her mouth. I had a feeling that she wasn't supposed to say that. Amber and Katie just stood for a minute before they both screamed and hugged Pam before Melody came out and joined in. Chad and Jeff looked at me. "What should we do?" "Let's go hang around the grill. I've got some drinks and they won't even miss us." We were on our second drinks and grilling the food before they remembered us. Still grinning, they sat down and let us serve them like the queens they were. They stayed for 4 hours before they had to leave. The women were in the living room, looking at wedding gowns on the computer, and the men had retreated again, this time to the kitchen. Jeff looked over at me. "When was the last time you saw Gail?" "It's been 15 years or better." "You and Honey?" 12. You know there isn't a chance of keeping her away when she finds out." "I know. I should probably email Gail, although I have no idea if she'd want to come." "She'll come. She and Honey are still friends, and I'm sure she'll tell her just as soon as she finds out." Jeff was right. Honey and Gail came to the wedding and sat in the back, tearing tissues up at an alarming rate. Even though Chad really didn't remember his mother, he was civil to her, let her into some of the photographs, and even did a mother/son dance with her. She was crying hard the whole time. I danced with Amber while Jeff danced with Katie. Then Chad took them both out on the floor. When Katie came off, she was sniffling. She grabbed my hand and mouthed later. I was standing there watching the couples dance when someone grabbed my hand and tugged. It was Gail. Dancing with her was kind of surreal, but she didn't say anything, just held me tightly, then let go and ran away when the music stopped. I did not dance with Honey, though Jeff did. I watched Amber watching them and wondered if Honey had any idea how close she was to losing her life. The women disappeared into a room to help the bride out of her dress, and I took the opportunity to sit down in a small alcove, thankful for the quiet. I was thinking about how old I was getting and smiling when the thought of grandchildren popped in my head when a hand landed on my shoulder. It was Gail. I started to get up, but she stopped me. "Please, stay seated. I owe you something, and I need to tell you why all those years ago, and I never did. I want to tell you now. May I sit?" I pushed a chair opposite me out with my foot, and she smiled. After she settled, she told me her story. It was more than I expected. She used to do it all the time when I started ranting about something. "I would appreciate it if you wouldn't talk and just listen so I can get this out." She sighed. "I did it for the money. We had been struggling financially all our lives. Suddenly I had a chance to make some real money. Honey talked me into it. She even took me into the club and had me watch while she danced. She was really good, and you didn't. I thought you'd take one look at me and scream. When you didn't, I started to relax. A few days later, he offered us more. Bill kind of disappeared for a while, and Honey and I stayed on the property. She did teach me a few dance moves, and I was always a good dancer. Then the washing machine broke down, and Honey told me I could make enough in one night to buy a new one. I hated the thought of going to the laundromat, so I decided to try it. Honey collected it for me, and I had $180. People back then worked hard all week and didn't make $180. Honey and I worked out a rotation. I'd work on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of one week. She'd work on Tuesday and Thursday, and then we'd switch the next week. I didn't fool around with anyone but Bill during that time, and he took me twice a week. After that, things got really challenging. Bill called me into his office and told me that from now on, customers had to pay $15 to use the room. It just kept getting worse until we got caught by the authorities. We never did find out how they found out about us. She paused, overwhelmed, but held onto my hand when I tried to get up. I need to confess that in my messed up thinking back then, I convinced myself that I was doing it for us, to create a better life. I even set a goal, $60,000, and then I was going to quit, find a small job somewhere, and pretend I was earning a lot more than I actually was, gradually putting it back into our accounts. But when we got caught, that plan never came to fruition. Gail stood up. That's all there is to it. I fell prey to my own greed and foolishness, and it cost me everything. It took me years to come to terms with it, but I've moved on. I am now a successful entrepreneur. She handed me a business card. Give this to Chad. Let him know that I appreciate the invitation, but he has enough family for now. Also tell him that if he has children, he can send me pictures. She paused at the door. Oh, and tell him to never go there. The same goes for you. He can contact me through a phone call or an email. If I can provide him with what he wants, I will. The same goes for you, by the way. Goodbye, Mac. I doubt we'll ever meet again, so live well. Love and protect your wife and daughter as best as you can. She smiled as she walked through the door. By the way, I named my business after you. Consider it a tribute. Then she disappeared. I glanced at the card. Max, A Club of Excellence for Gentlemen. Her number was written on the back. I was still there when Katie found me. Come on, she said, tugging my hand, let's go home and recover. I grinned as Melody approached us. Don't get too comfortable. We'll have to go through this all over again in a few years, and it will be much tougher for you. We'll handle it.